Yo, yo, yo! We're back to deliver an absolute masterclass because recently I just finished a book, and as you can tell by the title, this book genuinely changed my life trajectory. And obviously, spoiler alert, you guys already see it right here. Reality Transurfing by Vadim Zelan, right? Hopefully, I'm saying bro's name right because he's an absolute legend for making this book. And this book was just so good. I had to, step outside, soak up some sun, embrace nature whilst reading it, whilst extracting the absolute immense amount of value within it. But getting right into the presentation overview, context as to how exactly this book changed my life and how it could possibly change yours, right? Summary of the book itself, touching on the main takeaways and the overarching idea, the framework. This is so important. The framework that I used to ensure that I wasn't just reading, but I was actually applying the information that was being provided to me within this book, and then wrapping it up with just three of the highest ROI principles. The three principles that personally served me the best in terms of 78 days. If you can already assume 78 principles, so picking three was not easy. It was not easy, but managed to do it, and hopefully it could serve you in the same way it served me. But diving right into it, how a book altered my life trajectory. All right, so I got three columns here: the before, the during, and the after in completing this book. So, largely before reading this book, man, I would say overall I was misaligned from the real me, in that, touching on these points, I was playing according to other standards in games for so long, and that I would be, scrolling online, consuming content, especially the self-help, self-improvement space, right? Just absolutely going down the rabbit hole of that and seeing all these people with the success that I wanted, and viewing them as like these larger than life figures, and thus believing that all the advice and all the things that they were telling me, it was like, oh, I had to do that. But truthfully, I was playing their games. I wasn't creating my own. I wasn't playing by my rules. I was playing by rules that other people were just projecting onto me. And as a result, I lacked attunement towards who I was fundamentally, right? I was operating from a position of optimization over authenticity, sacrificing who I was in order to, extract these little hacks and try to shortcut the process towards stepping into the best version of myself, my 2.0, because that's what this channel is all about, right? Aligning yourself across the mental, the physical, and the spiritual to achieve that version of you. And the huge thing within the spiritual is authenticity, hands down, non-negotiable. And as I mentioned, excessively consuming self-help content, it only exacerbates the consequences in failing to truly embrace who I am. And another thing was that I, for so long, believed that in order to receive anything in this life, I had to leave it to, God, or like this, divine being, right? And calling it divine timing. But something I realized, which I'm going to touch on in, the after the completion, I mean, you guys can see it already, but I realized that it's not about externalizing my power and thus relying on something to bring me the life I want. It's about taking the initiative, taking the control of my reality, and thus creating my own timing. And so, in applying and actually reading this book while I was actively striving to change my life through the principles that I was learning about and beginning to understand more and more, I was gradually shifting my overall perspective of life. I was experiencing the small yet meaningful change to reinforce the potential within continued application of these principles, to where it's like, oh, if I continue doing this, if I, when I'm getting these micro wins and I'm seeing, these small meaningful changes, I'm like, oh damn, if I keep this up, what else can happen? What else can happen, And I also realized that life was essentially a game with a set of universal rules, right? I know a lot of people can resonate with the idea of, like gamifying your life and whatnot, but this book truly reinforced that. And it's not, just some corny thing of like, oh, life is like a video game, but genuinely there are a set of rules. And it's like, if you can play by those rules and thus leverage them in a way, it's like being able to know the latest meta within a video game, right? The latest, like, hack or cheat to then, put yourself above the competition. It's the same thing with life. And then overall, man, just conviction within my ability to influence my personal layer of reality, right? Conviction, such a powerful emotion or state to embrace. And truthfully, the conviction was beginning to stack and stack, in continuing to apply and actively see the change within this book. And so after completing it, man, it is safe to say that I am grounded within operating on my own personal standard, not playing according to others' games or rules. I'm attuned to my heart's desires and my authentic nature, optimizing for authenticity instead of optimization, right? And just overall ditching the traditional self-improvement space that is, it's essentially soulless, and it's just a bunch of people projecting their own opinions and judgments onto you, making you believe that, you have particular problems that don't even exist within your life just because they're trying to market their own ideals onto you. And instead, I realized that authentic success is the way, right? Pursuing a degree of success that is in alignment with who I am fundamentally. That is more important than anything within this life. And as I mentioned earlier, I realized that the only timing that matters is the timing that I decide for myself. Right here in this very moment, I can decide that I want to go out and achieve everything I desire. And it's just simply embracing that versus telling myself, like, oh, maybe one day, God or just some external being will bring me my desired reality. No, 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 no. That's not how we roll around here. But overall, became more aligned towards the real me, plus Brian 2.0, man. You're my highest self. And obviously for you, that's just you 2.0, right? Your highest self. And so the most significant materialized outcome that came from actively applying this book, because I can say all of this, but it doesn't mean anything if there's not proof. But the proof is you're witnessing the proof right now in that starting my YouTube channel after months of delay was the biggest, most significant change that came out of this book. And I'm not saying it was this book was the only reason why I was able to start this channel, but truthfully, in obtaining more conviction and realizing that I could genuinely alter reality and as corny as it sounds, bend it to my will, I realized I just naturally walked into a point where I realized that instead of constantly delaying and making excuses as to why I couldn't start content creation, because truthfully it was something I was so, passionate about and wanted to execute upon, but for some reason I just wasn't in that, I wasn't embracing that character, that version of me that could just go and do it. But in reading this book, it truly made me realize that I can just shift internally towards that version of me. And as a result, I just naturally walked into this season of life of just being able to start content creation, being able to make these, elaborate presentations and hop on the camera and talk and just provide value to people I actually care about, right? Truthfully, man, this was the most significant materialized outcome, but it could not have been possible without this main driver of change, and that is a framework that guaranteed the conversion of lessons to actions, insights to execution. Because information on its own is meaningless unless it genuinely compels you to execute from an authentic foundation. Because within anything you consume, not even just books, but within any piece of content, you have to go in with the intention of resonation over information. And that not every piece of advice being presented to you within, whatever you're consuming is not meant to be used. Right? This was something I struggled with so much in that I just believed that everything that I was absorbing had to be acted upon. But it's solely whatever the soul gravitates to, because that is where effortless application will occur. You won't have to discipline or force yourself to go and do X, Y, or Z, because it's something that genuinely you want to do because it aligns with who you are fundamentally and what you care about. And another thing is just that action is knowledge, right? Information only becomes knowledge as a result of applying, taking action on what is learned relative to your current circumstances and needs, right? It's not about mentally, masturbating over the information and thus opting for stagnation over action taken, right? That's a whole bar, but that's what analysis paralysis is. You start overthinking and you never do anything. You never move. You never make any moves. You never pivot. You just stand still, and that's the opposite of what we want to do when we are, we have the opportunity to intake all this information and thus actively leverage it towards our own personal circumstances. And it's a huge reason why it took me months to finish this book. If you go back up here, 78 days, right? That's essentially what the book is called, Transurfing in 78 days. And for each day there's like 78 principles, which obviously I'm going to touch on in the summary right here. But it took me months to finish this book. I started this back in February, and right now we're in August. It took me months to finish this book versus trying to speed run it and saying like, oh yeah, I read this book. Like, that's generally what some people do. They'll just read a book to say they read it and not even apply it. But that is not what I want to do, and I hope that's not what you want to do either within anything you consume. But regardless, let's hop right into the summary, boys. Reality alteration in 78 days, right? Obviously, reality transurfing in 78 days, transurfing reality. That's the overarching aim. 78 principles over 78 days, designed to gradually alter the way you think about life and thus empowering you to step into a desirable reality, right? Your desired reality, and embracing an identity conducive with your highest self, your 2.0, man. Come on, right? Absolutely phenomenal stuff. But main takeaways, main points that I personally found were, extremely pivotal in just altering my own perspective of life and thus allowing me to step into that identity and thus begin stepping closer towards that reality. And so the first one is the mirror analogy. In that the book outlines that reality is essentially like a mirror, and that your external life is a direct reflection of your internal state. So right here, the external is the reflection, and that's within the mirror. So this is your reality, right? And the internal, the image is what is in front of the mirror. So this is your internal state. But the thing is, your external state is a delayed materialization of the internal, and that your thoughts and beliefs undoubtedly shape your reality, but the response isn't instant, right? It's I like to use this analogy within the gym where it's like you don't when you hit a workout today, you won't see the results until weeks or months later. And it's the same thing with your reality where you could embrace certain internal states and experience certain emotions, but you won't necessarily have that be reflective in terms of being able to consistently experience that within your reality until after weeks, months, even years of just constantly driving that within your internal state. And thus you have to focus on changing the image, your intention, not the reflection, your circumstances, right? So many people, when they want to change their life and thus create a new identity and step into a new version of themselves, they think that they have to start changing all this external stuff. They have to start changing their circumstances. But it's about changing who you are internally, shifting internally, because that is what actually matters, right? You're changing what is here, but most people focus on this. But this is what determines the reflection. The reflection doesn't determine the reflection, right? So that's the mirror analogy. Absolutely it just absolutely boggled my mind when I realized that in reading the book. But second thing, pendulums, in that These are essentially unseen enemies that feed on emotion via keeping you in either a positive or negative state of being, right? You see this picture of the pendulum here. It's like when it swings to one side, right? Let's just say this is the negative side. It's almost like when it swings this way, it's designed to keep you in that emotionally negative state. The easiest example that I can think of is just that when you get into an argument with someone, or you're internally you're starting to like get like annoyed or angry, and then it's almost like you're bottling up all this negativity, and then you just let it out. That's kind of like what the pendulum. That's how a pendulum functions, and that it's feeding on your emotion, and it's just trying to keep you in that negative state, to where it's like internally you might be bottling up all these pent up aggression, and then you just let it all out, and then as a result, it just continues to be reinforced within your current state of being, and you're stuck in this negative loophole, this negative feedback loop. But it can also be, with positive emotions, and it's why you have to learn how to neutralize pendulums, because more often than not, it's this is why people experience, that they're stuck within that negativity constantly within their day to day, and it's why you have to just start going with the flow of life, right? Emotionally detached from the obstacles, the adversity, just the overall negativity that life may throw at you, and you just instead attach to every indication of a desirable experience, a positive experience, because that's when the pendulum starts swinging this way on the positive side, and thus it maintains emotional positivity within yourself, because that's what we want. We want to constantly be in a desirable state of mind, a state of being. And so the last thing is just, unity of heart and mind, right? This to me is absolutely foundational within stepping into the best version of you, your 2.0, and that all desirable outcomes within this life, within the physical, the material world, it all comes from the spiritual. And the mind is essentially the bridge between both, and that is what allows the heart to work its magic. And so you have to learn how to align your emotions with your thoughts to thus fast track the arrival of any desired experience within your life. And it's why, as I mentioned earlier, authentic success is everything, right? Unity between heart and soul and mind, your heart slash soul and mind, that is what creates authentic success within this day and age. And in misalignment between the two, that is what inauthentic, empty success is. That's why the traditional self-improvement space, it lacks heart and soul. It's so focused on, mind and all these mental models and frameworks, that it neglects, considering just this inner spiritual being that every person is within this day and age. And it's why it's so hard to find people that speak, in terms of creating authentic success within others, because everybody's just trying to project their own ideals and ideas onto you, and that doesn't align with who you are. Not everything other people think is going to align with what you think, which is why you should never take any information at face value that people are throwing at you. You need to learn how to unite your soul and your mind to thus be able to extract information in a way to where you're filtering it through that personal lens. And so that's just the overall book summary, boys. The framework that I use to autopilot results, right? What I use to guarantee application out of all 78 principles plus autopilot change within the mental, physical, and spiritual aspects of my character. 4 steps. Let's get straight into it. Just for context, on the right side, this is a sample of the very first principle that I read within the book in terms of utilizing this framework. And it's just to show that this is what I did for basically every single principle, every single one that just made it impossible for me to not execute. And so, first one is summary, right? Just a simple interpretation of what has been read, summarized into your own idea of what it means, right? Next thing is just relating what has been summarized, taking what has been read and actively questioning, how does this apply to who I am currently in my current circumstances? Because that is how you filter out the BS, filter out the noise, and really ask yourself, okay, how can I actively apply this within my current situation? And once you learn to relate what has been read, then it becomes so much easier to take action, because now you understand how to actively apply it in a way to where it fulfills how it might be of service and be of use to your current situation. And from there, once you take action, once you set the intention to execute, then you just come back and you think about the outcome, and instill a degree of reflection in that. Ask yourself, okay, what came about taking action on this principle? Did it actually, provide the value that I was looking for, or was it just, empty, right? Was it just, I opened the door and there was nothing on the other side? You know what I'm saying? And it truthfully, man, this 4 step framework, this goes beyond just any, even just a book, right? Within any piece of content, you could literally use this in terms of summarizing the information that you've learned, asking yourself, okay, how does it pertain to my current circumstances, creating, laying out a plan of action, and then just reflecting, right? It's just these 4 simple steps that I used within just reading this book in its entirety, to the point where it just made taking action impossible. Right, it made taking action, not just any type of action, action that actually mattered towards stepping into alignment with the version of me that I was striving to become. Right, my 2.0. This framework right here, it absolutely changed the game in terms of just content consumption in general, to the point where I realized that lacking this framework and just consuming content, without any intention to apply what is being learned, it's just not it. It's just not it when you have a framework like this at your disposal, man. So, truthfully, this framework absolutely life changing, and it is truthfully the reason why this book was able to have such a level of impact on me. And it's important to note that I would not move on to the next principle until every action step was completed or until I felt satisfied with its application within my life. And sometimes that would take a day, or other times it would take multiple. It would take me 3 or 4 days to get through one principle because I was genuinely trying to see how much value I could get out of it. Or maybe I felt like, oh, I didn't execute upon it as good today, so tomorrow I'm going to make sure I do. Right? It's that level of intention that it's so crucial within anything you consume if you're actually serious about wanting to apply and leverage it. And so, hopping into the three high ROI principles from reality transurfing, I've got a picture right here for each one from the book itself, so you can actually see, how it is, how the book itself explains these certain principles. And I've just got the summary and the action steps for these three principles that, I would say these are the best ones, right? These were the most impactful ones for me personally. And I'm not gonna read the summary, but in terms of the master's intention, my own, just off the top of my head, you have to understand that when you set the intention to just view everything in life as to your favor, in your advantage, nothing can stop you, right? Any sort of negativity that arises, and you just simply set the intention, like, you know what, this is working in my favor, right? No matter how bad it gets, no matter how undesirable or negative it seems, if you just set that intention, you will find a way. Your mind will naturally find a way to realize, like, oh shoot, like this is to my advantage, right? This actually does serve me. And the action step within this one was just affirming to myself that every present circumstance was operating to my advantage, right? And truthfully, in doing that, I was just able to realize that there were so many things that I would used to be so, easily moved by. But then, just simply affirming this within my day to day, whenever I started to feel negative, it just completely changed the course of just my overall level of consciousness within how I was operating. And thus, I was able to maintain a desirable positive image even in the face of adversity. And so the next one was just the bow wheel of intention. And that when it comes to figuring out how to step into your desired reality, step into the version of you that you were striving to become, right? Your 2.0, your mind, that's not the mind's job, right? We like to think that, if we focus so much on the how in terms of, how are we going to get there? How are we going to become our best selves? When you fixate so much on that mentally and drive so much thought towards that, you're just going to get stuck, because the thing is, your soul is what outlines the path. That is what illuminates the path towards stepping into the version of you, right? Your best self. Your soul determines the how. And it's why you need to reframe intention as basically that is what the mind is designed to do. As long as you maintain the intention, you don't focus on the how, you don't focus on the when, you just focus on the end goal. But it's not necessarily, a thing of like, oh, the outcome is more important than the effort, because the effort is, equally as important, if not more. But when you set your mind on, already being in that state in which, you've attained the goal, and then you thus detach from worrying about when or how it's going to happen, you'll find that your intuition, you'll just naturally start to walk the path towards that as if it's already happened. And truthfully, for this one, the action step that I used was just fixating the mind on intention within achieving, whatever my current goal at the time was, and also maintaining the desirable frame in terms of, no matter if life was reinforcing that, no, this isn't the right thing. I just maintained the idea of, okay, the mind is going to focus on intention, right? Nothing else, just purely the intention of achieving whatever it is I'm striving for. And as a result, life will naturally hand to me, the path, right? My soul will lay out the path for me. And so this was another absolutely phenomenal principle. And the last one I'm gonna touch on is just the unique soul. And that within every single person, man, obviously I touched on this earlier, the soul, the spiritual, it is the foundation for any degree of authentic success within this life. And relinquishing that individuality, that uniqueness that you possess within your soul, it is a complete disservice towards who you are fundamentally, because when you turn to your heart, that is where all the knowledge, that is where all the creative insights, and that is where true achievement of your desired reality begins, right? You have to understand that the soul, it it is boundless, it is limitless. And as I mentioned earlier with the pendulums, they don't want you to project your soul. They don't want you to experience and thus embrace that state of just unlimited potential. And it's why for this one, the action I used was just looking back at my life, looking back on my journey, and listing out three of the natural strengths that evidently served me well in the past, that represent who I am fundamentally, my own authentic nature. And then in doing that, I assigned an action for each of those. And one of those things, for me personally, was journaling. In that I used to journal so much, earlier on in my journey. But I found that I stopped doing that. And so in reminding myself of that natural strength, because, truthfully, I look back at the times I would journal and I thought to myself, like, wow, I was able to articulate myself so much better and actually utilize journaling in a way to where it just actually furthered my life in the way that I wanted to. And so nowadays I'm beginning to journal more and more, because this was obviously towards the tail end of the book, right? 72 out of 78. Now I'm beginning to actively understand that, yeah, journaling serves me well. So it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that's the thing about your soul, is that there's so many things in this life that genuinely align towards who you are fundamentally. And once you figure those out, you can just spam that until the end of time, realistically. And so that's the three principles right here: master's intention, boat wheel of intention, right? Two of them were about intention, because intention is powerful, I won't lie, and then unique soul. And that, boys, wraps up the presentation. And that this presentation wholeheartedly was a testament to the idea that when you pair the right information, as seen within, this book, within Reality Transurfing, with the right framework, the four-step framework of summary, relate, action, and reflection slash outcome, right? When you combine those two things, meaningful change becomes inevitable. And that within any piece of content information beyond solely books, it is essential to always internalize your power, never externalize your power, to truly identify and extract the value that it possesses that actually matters to who you are fundamentally. And thus, in doing that, you can leverage it to your personal system, your personal playbook, your personal standard, right? When you go to consume content, never mindlessly consume and just take information at face value, because obviously, as I touched on earlier, in doing that, I just sacrificed my authenticity, and instead I was just seeking optimization. I was just seeking any sort of little hack or trick that I could use to, shortcut the process. But that is not how it is. That is not what stepping into the real highest version of yourself is, right? That is not real success. And so you have to construct a method that bulletproofs both reflection and application of the knowledge provided, to ensure you control the content versus the content controlling you, right? When you go to consume something, you never want to be a victim towards whatever it is you're consuming. That's essentially what doom scrolling is nowadays. Like, you are relinquishing control over technology, over social media, and you're allowing it to control you. But the overarching idea, if I'm being honest, is that we are trying to make anything we consume, any piece of content or information, we want to make it our bitch, respectfully, right? And so the most important thing beyond all of this is that, you have to have a foundation within this method based on genuine, authentic desire to want to learn and apply any information that resonates, right? Resonation over information within your 2.0 highest version of yourself, right? In that, it's not about acting upon every piece of information that is being provided to you, as I touched on earlier. It's about what resonates with you, identifying what it is that you genuinely feel compelled to do. And from there, you just effortlessly take action that's aligned with what you are striving to become. And of course, man, in doing that, you achieve alignment across your mental, your physical, spiritual being, your mind, body, and heart slash soul, and your thoughts, your actions, and your beliefs. Because on this channel, that is what we are all striving for, right? That is what I am striving for every single day, right? Trying to align myself across mind, body, and soul to thus step into my 2.0, the highest version of me, and thus touch that level of authentic success that, wholeheartedly everybody is trying to achieve. But it's just so hard nowadays when, you have like the traditional self-improvement space, and just everybody being so drawn towards, these figures, these figures that preach inauthentic success, and that they don't understand that, sure, you can focus on the mental and the physical, but when you neglect the spiritual, all of the things that you gain within these two things, the money, within your fitness, the physique, just the status, the influence, whatever it might be, whatever material outcome you can conceptualize, none of it will feel fulfilling or meaningful towards who you are, because you don't have that spiritual foundation. But using this framework, man, and just actively driving the intention to align myself across all three of these things within reading this book, it proved to be so powerful. And it's why I am here, wholeheartedly, right? Coming on here, providing value, actively striving to further my own intention to not only, step into my 2.0, but help other people acknowledge that within themselves, and thus help them to do the same. But that wraps it up. The presentation on how reality transurfing genuinely changed my life trajectory, all the frameworks, the insights, the takeaways I got from it. Obviously, if it resonates, if anything resonates with you within this presentation, that is your sign to go and apply it, right? If just you feel compelled to execute on just whatever piece of knowledge that you extracted from this video, that is you operating in alignment with your soul. And that is everything, right? If at least one person can do that from watching this video, my job is done. But hope y'all enjoyed. Like, comment, feedback, always appreciated. But till then, see you boys in the next one. Peace.